Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. Hi, Bhavin. Welcome to
Hi,
Cloudbazaar. Manish.
hi,
Uh,
Manish.
this is going to be a really fun, exciting session. We've invited someone that I don't think needs much introduction. Bhavin Turakhia has obviously been one of our most successful entrepreneurs out of India in our industry. Um, and for those of you who want some of his background, serial entrepreneur, last 22 years, he's bootstrapped 5 successful businesses. Founder and CEO of the Direct Eye Group, of Flock, of Zeta, of Radix, done it many, many times over and over again. And what I really I'll enjoy about the session is that so far today, Bhavin, we've spoken to a lot of people who've talked about trends and about industry and about investments and about how things are transforming and disrupting and changing and what's the future like. But very few have been like you and actually kind of been there and done that over the last 20 years, over and over and over again. So that's why it's going to be a very interesting session. So let's dive in, Bhavin, right? So um, let's well, firstly, just as an icebreaker, where exactly are you in the world? Because I know that you're always traveling and at different places. So where are you today?
I'm currently in London. Yeah, this is my home in
Okay,
London.
you're in London. Great. A lovely home. Thanks for joining us from London. Appreciate it.
My
Um,
pleasure.
so, Bhavin, you've obviously been running so many different companies in parallel, and I know, like, for you, you're always working because, like you told me, that's your creative high to keep working. But when you've kind of looked at the last 6 to 9 months and all the stuff that has transformed around you, right? Um, like, what are the massive shifts that you've started seeing? Right. So if you actually picked a couple of big shifts that you are seeing, particularly the internet industry, and you have a vision of not just the Indian market, but I know you spend a bunch of time in Dubai, in London, in the US. So you're seeing a whole bunch of different markets. So what are some of the massive shifts that you're seeing across all these markets as it relates to, let's just pick the internet industry, right? Because that's the fundamental industry that we're all part of.
No, absolutely. So first off, obviously the world has completely changed the last. Well, nobody expected. 2020 is kind of like a gap year for the world in some ways. Nobody expected, sort of whole pandemic and whatever not. Funny thing is that for me personally, my life hasn't changed much. I've been preparing, I guess, in some sense for, you know, sort of a hermit, self-isolated life for the last 10 years because I work remotely from, as you rightly said, from Dubai, London, New York, Mumbai, Bangalore, and I keep hopping around. So I've been working remotely for the most part. But clearly, there have been a lot of changes that I've experienced, and certainly a lot of changes in the world. I think firstly, the world's sort of digital adoption has accelerated by at least 3 to 5 years, if not more. And many of those changes are here to stay, and I think they're going to be positive for the world. So I think one of the silver linings of COVID, I feel guilty saying this, is it's been an amazing year, firstly for internet companies, and more importantly, I think changes and so also become like the largest sort of experiment A/B test of remote work ever. And so in many ways, many of these practices will continue even after. Fortunately, now we've got 4 different vaccine options right around the corner. But even after sort of the whole pandemic is over, and I see significant, like for instance with Zeta, a lot of our work happens with banks. I would travel about to India about once every month to sort of meet up with customers and prospects, because most banks typically the expectation is you meet up with them in person. And now the whole expectation from clients, from BD deals, from M&A deals, from any meetings, etc., is gone. You basically can meet remotely, and I think it's going to save a lot of unnecessary travel and commute time that otherwise would have existed. So remote work, certainly we're actually witnessing a trend right now at Cloudbazaar, remote conferences, which I think it's interesting how these platforms have come up, but I'm hoping that they will subside to a certain extent, because it'd be far more fun if we were doing this in person with an actual crowd in front of us.
Yes.
But yeah, the world's definitely going to be more efficient in terms of lesser meetings that are required to actually travel and commute, and people are much more willing to now catch up online, and it's become second nature.
So digitization and using of digital products and the internet, totally. But so I just going back in history, and it's a fun kind of look back is I think I told you in 2012, we had done the opening keynote at World Hosting Days, which was one of the precursors to this event, right? Because over the years, this is a ninth year, but World Hosting Days really is, I think, where it all started. And you would know better because that was a property launched by DirectEye. Um, I remember at that time you had made this statement that when a market gets to 30, 40% internet penetration, and as that many consumers start consuming stuff online, businesses will automatically start moving online to serve their customers, right? And somewhere I felt like Indian SMBs, MSMEs were almost like resisting that adoption until now. And now, like you're saying, it's just like seems to have taken off where everybody wants an e-commerce website, right? So if you look at it from that perspective, and you know the audience for Cloudbazaar, a lot of them are web professionals, right, who serve MSMEs. So like what advice would you give them? So it's digitization. People are saying they want e-commerce websites. They all want to come online. So how should they think about serving this current and future need of digitization for MSMEs in India? Like what are the sets of products you think, right? It's not just websites, right? What else is in that chain of products you think?
Yeah, I think in that regards, I think our web professionals industry and the hosting industry has some catch up to do, I will say, which is that now even more so than ever, it's essential that we make this journey of digital transformation, of going online, of setting up a web presence as easy as possible. So if somebody has to go to a website, buy a domain name, buy a cPanel hosting package, set up WordPress, point their DNS, log into WP admin, create a web page, add a Stripe button. Like if somebody has to do all this even till today, and this is, by the way, that this used to be the case in 2012 too, then I'm sorry, really, we haven't made meaningful progress as an industry. And so I think there's quite a few things that many of us in the industry, I think we should work towards. And there are some interesting products that have launched in India for, quick online shops and things like that. But how easy can we make it with, either in case of India specifically, even more so with a mobile device, that somebody can actually just set up a quick online web presence, quick shop, and create an experience without having to understand, SPF and MX and A records and DNS and domain names and cPanel and things like that. Like, how do we make it so easy that that we can actually both leverage the boom and help these consumers, help these customers truly set up their online presence.
Got it. So let me switch gears a bit because I know many people also watching, are entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs. So you've been a tech entrepreneur, right? So as a tech entrepreneur, one has to be very good at identifying the customer needs, the problems, the inefficiencies they're trying to solve, right? So you've done that over and over again. So like what are learnings for today's entrepreneurs, and how do they think about identifying problem sets that they should solve in a certain way in order to achieve success as an entrepreneur? And if you can try to answer that question from both market uncertainty versus tech uncertainty, right? Because there's some entrepreneurs who have a lot of certainty in technology and they go and try to attack a new market or commercial problem, versus the others who try to attack an existing commercial problem but with maybe a new set of tech and products. So if you could put those two axes on and then tell me how you've gone about thinking what are the right problems to attack, right? And how do we solve those problems as an entrepreneur? Just from your experience.
Sure. So there's multiple questions in there. So first, I'll talk about this whole market versus tech. I will say, as a techie, and this might sound a bit odd coming from me, but the tech is a means to an end. So the bigger problem to solve is not really how you will build the product. Sure, some people you'll have to figure that out, get the right CTO or team or people in place, but it's actually identifying what to do is much more difficult, and that's where most businesses fail as compared to how to do it. The how to do it is hireable, is learnable basically, right? But the what to do is really what takes the analytical bend, the experience, the mistakes. I can tell you most of my capital has been wasted, most of my time and effort has been wasted, and most of my mistakes have been made in ideas that I thought were outstanding but were really not. So, having made all these mistakes, I think it's, for me, it's now by now sort of a framework. I mean, consistently across, 4 or 5 different businesses. Every one of my companies, I think of them going through 4 stages, which is planning, discovery, steady state, scaling, and steady state. So every company that I launch, every product that I launch, every business that I launch will go through these 4 stages. In the planning stage, I'm trying to figure out whether I should get into this business. In the discovery stage, I'm trying to validate whether actually this business can be successful. In the scaling stage, now I know the business can be successful, so we scale it and make it big. The steady state stage, I'm not really needed anymore. Baby's grown up to a teenage child and sort of doing things on their own, right? And so really most of these questions that you spoke about, which is which problems to pick up, how to pick up a problem, how to identify, a lot of it is covered in the planning stage and the discovery stage. And for me, both of those are also kind of semi-templates. So in the planning stage, essentially there are 6 questions that I'm looking to answer. And any business, by the way, any business at any stage should have a clear answer to these 6 questions to really determine that you have a successful business plan and a successful potential business, which is what is the target persona? So who are we actually addressing? Who am I trying to sell a particular product to or solve a problem for? What is their problem? So clear articulated problem saying that, hey, this target persona has this particular problem that we're trying to solve. What is your validated solution and why is it better than an existing solution, right? So assume that you've picked a persona and you've identified a problem, quite likely that they're already solving that problem in some half-baked way. That's the reason why that problem exists and was identifiable. So your solution needs to be at least 3x, 5x, 10x better than an existing solution, not 20%, not 30%, because then you won't get the adoption. So that's your validated solution. What's the go-to-market strategy? Because you could have an outstanding product, but if you have no way and means to be able to get it to the market, then you've got you've not got the recipe for success. What's the revenue model? And I know a lot of startups is kind of almost fashionable to not start thinking about revenue. I've at least built businesses for the most part trying to think about how we generate revenue. And then an important element that a lot of people sometimes tend to leave out is that you could have all the ingredients of a successful business, but do you actually have a moat that will ensure sustainability in the longer term? So you build something amazing and somebody else can come along, replicate it, sell it cheaper than you and take away your customers and you have no lock-in, then you don't have, again, the recipe for successful business. So it's persona, problem, product, GTM, revenue, and moat, right? You get these 6 things right and you validate all of them appropriately, you've got the ingredients for sort of a successful business, basically. And that's the way I think about trying to pick an area and validating all of this. And sometimes it'll take me a year. Zeta, me and my co-founder Ramki, we spent a year. Like we knew we wanted to do something in the payments and banking and commerce space, but that's like a vast, empty, wide space, right? How do we pick? We spent a year researching and learning about the industry enough to sort of make a determination as to, okay, this is what we want to pursue. This is the path we want to follow.
Got it. That's great. But so you sort of mentioned that many of your ideas sort of weren't successful, right? But obviously the ones that were, you went down this path successfully and did these six things that you mentioned. But the ones that were not successful, let's talk about those because there are always learnings there, right? So what's a couple of examples of why some of them weren't successful? Like which of these 6 you felt that you stumbled on early enough, right? And that's why they weren't successful.
In most cases, always for almost everybody ends up being the first 3, which is that most people, most people try out some idea, try out an idea because they think it's great for themselves. And that's why this whole notion of persona, problem, and product is really critical to digest, right? So I'm not saying it's a bad idea. Sometimes you get an idea saying, hey, I wish this product existed because I am a perfect target audience for it. But sometimes it might turn out that you are a target audience of one, and actually you're the only one who actually has that problem. So most of the failures that I've seen or the people that I met, have spoken about, etc., is around this notion of not clearly understanding who the target persona is, what the problem is, and what the product is. We had this marketing lead in our organization, revenue lead in our organization. He used to keep joking about how we should catch every individual in our company and tattoo on the inside of their eyelids, "You are not the customer," because this is one of the biggest fallacies that people, that entrepreneurs and techies and product people tend to sort of make, is that they by default assume themselves to be the customer and think of the product from their standpoint. So I think that's really where enough, enough time needs to be spent. And while you might have a idea during the planning stage and you flesh it out, etc., that's where the discovery phase comes in. And the discovery phase, your goal is to get to product market fit. And there are actually a couple of different interesting frameworks you can use out here also. So high net promoter score means you have potential for product market fit. High retention, so if you've got 100 customers coming in the funnel, 60 might leave or 70 might leave, but if 30 are sticking around and they really like your product, then that's a great idea. Another framework that I read about, that we've sort of started to sort of think about ourselves, is this whole notion of taking a set of people, a set of your customers, in this product market fit discovery stage, and doing a survey amongst them, saying that if we took away the product from you, would you be very disappointed, not care? And you need to sort of figure out what your very disappointed score is. And if it's 40% and above, then you've got a product market fit. So if out of 100 users of your product, if you ask them the question that I'll take this away from you tomorrow, how's it going to impact you? You're going to be very disappointed. And if at least 40 people don't tell you that they're going to be very disappointed, you might have a product that people are willing to use right now, but you don't have product market fit yet. So there are some, again, very standard, approaches and frameworks you can use to kind of determine that you're getting there.
Got it. Great. So, I know a lot of people make this comparison about India and the Silicon Valley, right? And about how, Indian startups, and I don't know how many are 20, 30,000 Indian startups and all these unicorns. In the previous VC panel, we heard that there'll be some 100 unicorns by 2025 or something like that. You've primarily, while you've run global companies, a lot of your startups have tended to come out of India, right? In terms of technology, people, the early stage. So if you kind of compare and contrast the Indian startup ecosystem, the capabilities, the competencies, how you've done it out of India to Silicon Valley, do you think that's a replicable model whereby India can actually build to the kind of scale the Silicon Valley has reached in terms of the startup ecosystem? Or do you think we're still way too far away?
So I think scale the startup ecosystem is a function of two things. One is people, talent, and ability to build products that can actually scale. The second is the opportunity to be able to sell them into a market that provides that scale. The one thing I will say about India, and I've historically had a lot of businesses that have leveraged India for technology and engineering. I think we have an amazing team here in India. But pretty much all of them have made most of their revenue from North America, Europe, etc. India has not been our revenue hub. And to be fair, if you look at total GDP, if you look at per capita income, and compare it to sort of US, Europe, and things like that, you would conventionally find we're so far away in terms of the market size and potential in many of these respects, right? Though it depends on market to market. Some companies like, I don't know, Netflix and entertainment organized, they're finding India to be a really large market. So there are some markets that certainly, because of the number of people that we have and how commoditized that product might be and how relevant it might be to a massive audience, certainly India represents a sizable opportunity. But for the most part, I've found that for every, at least in B2B SaaS, until today, and things are changing quite fast, I've found that for every dollar that we've invested in more developed markets has resulted, from a marketing standpoint, from a sales and a revenue generating standpoint, has resulted in between 2 to 5 times returns more than the same dollar invested in India. So having said that, the answer to your question is still yes, meaning that I think that India has great potential in terms of talent. In fact, in many ways now, COVID could actually be a great equalizer, right? Because now it truly now doesn't matter where you work from. All of us have been working remotely for the last year and will continue to do so for at least the foreseeable future, the next 6 months or so. So it's demonstrated that it doesn't matter where your talent is. And therefore, any talent anywhere in the world can technically leverage any market anywhere in the world. And by virtue of that, it could be that COVID ends up being this great equalizer where we already see this in B2B SaaS. I mean, we started the trend in some ways, or at least I would say we were part of the initial trend amongst a few people. But now we see companies like, there's Freshdesk, they're on your sponsor list, there's Zoho, BrowserStack, many companies from India that are building products in India and then taking them globally. and making a dent, elsewhere and building substantial revenue from outside. So I do believe that there is an opportunity to recreate or create significant success from India. But I believe that many Indian companies.
Oops, we may have just lost Bhavin. Oh, there he is.
I don't know what happened. So I was going to say that they'll have to set their sights on global markets and not just restrict themselves to the Indian market.
Okay. Because I think one of the things you kind of have mentioned a couple of times is product market fit. So this tells me that you believe that we can have entrepreneurs, founders, startups, folks in India who can understand the market fit abroad and build product here. You don't necessarily have to be living there physically. Would that be fair?
I mean, I believe so. Yes, you certainly don't have to establish an entire team, but it always helps to have people on the ground. And depending on the context of the product you're building, that will kind of decide the size of the kind of people that you have on ground. So, for instance, for Zeta, we do a ton of our engineering in India. We've launched in the US. We intend to hire. We're already hiring sort of product folks there, and we'll look to build out a product team there also, so we can get local context basically. And so that's certainly going to be important. But yeah, it's not. Doesn't require you to have full-fledged presence in a country
Okay.
to potentially get product market fit. Yeah.
Let's see. I'm going to actually start looking at some of the questions on the side, Bhavan. I think there's one which I had in mind as well that's come in, which is in the next decade, which is the one industry you think that needs rapid disruption?
I think two industries actually in some ways are already going through that. After banking and finance, which we are predominantly tackling with Zeta, we've built an amazing tech platform that banks can use to launch a full-fledged sort of banking stack. But after banking and fintech, which has been seeing a lot of a wave of innovation in the last 4, 5, 7 years, I think it's education. Part of Unacademy as a board member and mentor and have seen their journey. They're doing like Gaurav and everybody there is doing an amazing job, but so are many other sort of edtech ventures in the country, and there's healthcare. I think these two fundamentally need to see significant disruption. In fact, both of them, unfortunately, I guess, bore the brunt of COVID. Education, especially like schools and colleges and universities, just not prepared to disseminate education online and have scrambled to make it work. And when you think about K-12 and people who are younger, like children, primary education, things have been quite a bit in shambles for them. So there's definitely meaningful disruption required there. And then even healthcare, we couldn't match the peaks of this sort of pandemic, and lots of healthcare systems. I mean, they did amazing. A lot of people did amazing work, but many places, unfortunately, just because the unavailability of infrastructure and people and technology and stuff, we were unable to sort of provide the quality of healthcare that I think people deserve. So I think both these industries are probably going to see significant disruption now over the course of the next decade.
Got it. In fact, there's some other question about where does the next set of ideas, a set of problems to work on come from? And so maybe it's these two industries then, education and healthcare, given how much potential there exists to actually make
I
a
am
big
certainly interested
difference
in both
globally, right?
Definitely, I'm certainly interested in I'm at least a passive interest, well, in education actively so, in healthcare passively so. I've been sort of researching and studying, but I do have my hands full right now on communication, collaboration, and banking and payments. So, so for the next few years at least, I don't see any new sort of new ideas that are not within these two domains that I intend to initiate.
So there's one of the question that's here, which I think ties back to one of the comments you made earlier about how there are a lot of startups that think about monetization and revenue later, and how you've consistently thought about revenue and profitability to sustain yourself, right? Versus many startups who raise VC funding, and the question is really about valuation. They go after some other metric, like could be GMV, could be transaction, could be even the old internet days was eyeballs, if you remember. So and then they get great valuations. Yeah, I know you're laughing. You get great valuations. And is that scary? Because then you hit a period like you saw the pandemic. What happened is many startups then couldn't sustain themselves because they weren't profitable, and they had to let a lot of people go. We had job losses, right? So how do you? So number one, do you think that the sudden spurt in valuation that you're seeing and the money that's flowing is a little scary? And number two, do you think that the startups today in the country can do a much better job at profitability?
Sure. So a couple of interesting questions there again. So firstly, I don't find the evaluations scary. I just think I personally think that as an industry, and I've always believed that we focus a lot on valuation, and valuation is sort of a side effect. It's an outcome. It's not the primary thing to focus on. It's never been an exact science in many circumstances. Think about Bitcoin and Tesla. People have completely sort of stellar, completely opposite and contrarian views on the valuations of both of those commodities, right? So I think that to me, I've always said focus on value creation and not valuation. So as a business, doesn't matter whether you get high or low valuation. That's more of a means to an end. But if you focus on creating value, you will always have a sustainable business. It doesn't necessarily mean a focus on profitability, though that can help, early on, because you don't have to keep depending on capital raises again and again and again. And I put this up on my Twitter handle recently, like this whole notion about the fact that companies that generate EBITDA create this interesting flywheel, because you can reinvest that EBITDA to generate more EBITDA. So if you focus on generating profit, you can keep growing that flywheel. Companies that have to keep raising funds have to keep raising funds. And so, that keeps going, it becomes sort of a vicious cycle in that respect, right? So certainly there are companies where valuations may not necessarily be long-term sustainable, but that doesn't matter. As long as those companies are focusing on truly creating value and disruptive value for a customer, the company will sustain even if the valuations may not sustain. The valuation is just, I mean, 2008, and during COVID, the first few months, like tons of companies dropped in value by such a significant amount because of market conditions. So to me, valuations are not representative of the value that a company is creating at all points in time.
Got it. All right, I'm going to ask you one last question. I know we're running short of time, Bhavin, but there was this question here about all this digitalizations happen. People are moving online, people are buying online, selling online. And since you've seen so many different countries and lived in different countries, if you contrast India's IT infrastructure, right? Do you feel we are there yet to take full advantage of all of this digitization or digitalization happening, or do you still feel we have a ways to go in terms of infrastructure?
I think India's come a long way, with Geo and 4G, now potentially 5G, sort of come a long way. So there's two to three things that I guess are needed from a digital transformation standpoint. One is sort of connectivity infrastructure, second is kind of payments infrastructure, and third is devices, and then fourth would be sort of people's ability to be able to kind of handle that transformation in terms of education and things of that, right? And I see meaningful progress in all of that connectivity, like leaps and bounds. So I mean, I am actually amazed at the fact that the country has been able to handle such a spurt in connectivity demands and needs during this entire COVID time, etc. So that does clearly demonstrate that, from a connectivity standpoint, we're there. Payment infrastructure, I mean, RBI has been fairly progressive in terms of security and policies that protect consumers from online transactions, etc. There are some frictional hurdles to be solved, but there are continuous changes and improvements happening in the industry. So I see that also sort of as progressing. I think the main area potentially where, again, Geo and a bunch of others are doing work, Google, etc. But the like cheaper devices is probably where we need to sort of make still sort of further progress, so we can ensure that everybody has access to a smart, intelligent device that they can use to conduct business online and conduct their life online. So I think that's probably an area that needs some level of progress. And then language is another barrier for most of the applications and things that we do online today. And in India, as we get to that, bottom half of the pyramid, or the next 500 million or whatever you call it, you're going to need sort of language to sort of stop becoming a hurdle and a barrier, and ensure enable people can sort of browse in what they are comfortable with.
Great, awesome. So we have no more questions here, and Bhavin, this was great. Thanks so much for your time. You've been a real pioneer in our industry, and so it's always a pleasure to host you at Cloudbazaar. So thanks again, and take care. And for those of you listening, please stay tuned on this channel. We're going to play a really interesting video from WWF, World Wildlife Fund. It's a conservation video called Our Planet. It's a special screening. Um, stay tuned and take a look at the video. Thanks, Bhavin.
Thanks,
Have a good
Manish.
day. Bye.
Thanks.